In this video, we're going to take a look at persistence between multiple views, and we'll be using the environment object and also the observable object as well. Before we do anything with that, we need to go through and try to create more of a framework for a register view, because we will be using that particular view to set data when we create our instance of user data that is extending and implementing that observable object. And in order to do that, we just need to start somewhere. So we'll start on the register view. Now on our register view, what we want to have happen is we want to create a form. This is where we can put our text fields, our buttons, our pickers, and some of those types of controls. We've looked at this previously. We're going to look at it once again. And in this case, we are going to change our V stack over to a navigation stack at this point. We also want to go through and remove our text here that we had, and we're going to change this out to be a form. And we're going to go through and add a title to our form. So using the navigation title, we're going to set this equal to user registration. If we click on it now, we should see that we have user registration there. We can always click back on our tabs. This is going to give us the capability to switch between the two things. And in fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and take off this font.title. It's not really needed any longer. And when I go back to my register view, I still see that. Now on my register view, what I want to do is I want to put in a section within my form. And within the section, I want to add two text fields and a button. So I'm going to start with a text field. This is going to contain first name. So it should show this as the prompt, and it's going to have text with two-way binding to a first name field. We don't have that field defined, so let's go up and let's define some of our state properties that we're going to define here. This is going to be @state. We're going to call this first name. This is going to be type string, and we're going to set it equal to an initial value of an empty string. Going to go ahead and do the same thing with my last name. Var last name string equals empty string, and that'll at least allow us to do our two-way binding here. So we'll go back down and add our second text field. Our text is going to have two-way binding, so it updates the view after something changes here. And this is going to be last name. I should start seeing my form be built. I'm going to go ahead and add a button now. It's going to have text on the button saying register with an action where we want to register our user. In order to really make this happen, I'm going to have to come up and add a function called register user. It's not going to accept any parameters. Now that I have that, at least I can finish out with my styling for the button. I'm going to actually go to the next line and add padding. Add my button style. This is going to be a bordered prominent. I can spell. And I'm going to give it a purple tint. So I should see my form here. I also want to come down, and one of the things that I want to do is I want to put an alert out there that will pop up, and once they have gone through and they have entered everything, I want to toggle a Boolean value that will then cause that alert message to pop up. Then when they click the OK button, it will toggle that value back and shut it down, so to speak. So we're going to come up here and create another variable. And in this case, we're going to call this at state var show registered alert. And this is going to be bool as I indicated. And we're going to start with a false value. Now, after my navigation title, I'm going to go ahead and add another option, which is that alert. And that alert is going to take a title. So this is going to be the registration confirmed. I'm also going to provide it a parameter. And this is going to be my two-way binding that I'm using for my show registered alert. And when I do that, I could, if I needed something other than just the OK button, I could put some additional buttons here, but I'm just going to put a message here saying no buttons needed because we're just using that OK button. And then I can come down here and add my message. And within my message, I want to go ahead and add my text. And this is going to be what shows up in the dialog saying your registration was successful. And at this point, I can go up to my register user. I can fill in some of the processing, not everything, but I can add an if statement here to check to see whether my first name is empty. Whoops. And whether my last name is not empty. So if those two are not empty, then I know that I have values that somebody entered, which is what I'm trying to achieve here. And I can go through and reset those values to an empty space. We'll be doing something before that once we get our objects that we're going to have persisted set up here. And one of the other things that we want to do here is show our register alert, and we want to toggle it. So at this point, if I would come to my register page, I could see that I'm going to go ahead and enter my name, hit the register button, I get my confirmation, I see that I've already cleared out the fields, I could say OK, and essentially it's not really doing anything at this point other than that, because we haven't necessarily persisted the data except within this particular view. We want to share this data with our content view and be able to see the things that we entered on our user registration page in the content view. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things that we need to do is we need to create some type of class for all the data that we would potentially need to persist between forms. And if we were creating a game, maybe if next week when we have to do that for converting our war game over, and in this case I'm going to be converting the blackjack game over, I'm going to have game state that I'm going to have to persist through each iteration, and then also to show some of the final results are going to have to use some type of a class to do that. And I can come over here and I can add a class. In our case, we're going to call this user data. So all I need to do here is define my class, and this is going to be user data. It's going to implement the observable object. Now what the observable object does, it basically triggers and says, hey, this class has something in it that needs to be watched, and if something changes in this class, then wherever it's being used, then those fields that are marked as published need to update the user interface. So if we were doing something where we were adding something to a cart and we were doing it in one page and then we went to the checkout, it would immediately be triggered that something got added and it would know that it needs to refresh its view to show the data that had been updated. So this is going to be observable object that we use here. So that's what we are implementing, that protocol. We are going to go ahead and put in 2 string values, and if you haven't guessed, it's the first name and the last name that we are going to publish. So these are going to be published fields. Var first name, defined as a string, and this is going to be an optional string because initially it's not going to have a value. And then we're also publishing our last name as well, and this is going to be a string value as well. And this is essentially all our class is. We're just putting in our observable object and extending that for our user data with those 2 properties. If we had methods that we needed to add, we could do that. If we had additional fields that we needed to track, we could do that. But in our case, we don't have any other data. We have this class that we've defined, but how do we use this class? How do we get this to persist? We have this object, but what do we need in order for everything to be able to see it? What we need to do is we need to pass it to our main view as an environment object, which is then going to set it up as an environment object, and it's just going to be there, and any pages can then check for the object that we've put in, and if it exists, then it's going to allow it to see the contents of that object, and if it doesn't exist, then it's going to be a little bit of more problem. Let's go to our My App. This is where we're going to implement this. And we have to go through and set up state object here. So this is going to be a state object. And this is going to be where we're creating our instance of the data that we're going to be sharing with the views. And this is going to be instantiating our class that we just created, our user data. So now we have a state object. Once we have a state object, then we can pass it using our environment object. So on my main view, I'm going to pass it to the main view as an environment object, just specifying my user data. Once I do that, I can then use a particular command that within each of the views, and that is the environment object, and I can pull out that user data. So let's go ahead and first on our register view, let's go there, and we're going to go ahead and add up here our environment object. This is going to be var user data, and this is going to be of type user data. Now I have the ability to use my environment variable that I have created, that object that we stored in the environment, and I can come here and finish out my method that I was starting. And what I wanted to do now is to go through, and on my user data, I have a first name field, and I want to set the first name before I clear it out in my environment object. So I'm just going to maintain that value so it doesn't get lost, and then I can go ahead and clear it out of my form, but it will still be like in memory, and I can access it using my environment variable. I'm going to do the same thing with my last name, set it equal to the last name. Now I have it stored in my environment variable, and I can go ahead and access it anywhere that has access to that environment object. That pretty much is going to be everything we need here. Even if we would go through at this point and try to enter stuff, it would store it in the environment, but we would never be able to see it because we don't have any pages that are showing that. So let's go to our content view, and we're simply going to do a very small fix over here. We just want to go ahead and show like a little message down at the bottom of our page. We're going to go after our navigation title, and we're going to put a spacer in because we want to push it down to the bottom of the page. We have a lot going on at the top of the page, so we want to go ahead and do this, if I can spell spacer. And what we want to do now is we want to add our environment object so that we have access to it here. And I'm going to just kind of space down here and do the @ environment object. This is var user data of type user data, same as what we saw before on the other page. Now we should have access to that user data. And I can go through and say, if I have text that is stored there, I want to go ahead and output some type of a welcome message. But if I don't have text stored in there, then I don't want to see the message. And I can do that using a if statement. So user data dot first name not equal to nil. We know that those are optional strings. If we don't have any value that has been entered on the form, we're not going to see anything there. And then I can go ahead and do the same for the user data dot last name not equal to nil. Then I know that I have some data, and I just want to go ahead and do a text message, say welcome, and use some string interpolation. This is user data dot first name space slash user data dot last name, and then I want to go ahead and add an exclamation point. Then I want to maybe make this, I'll fix the explicit there in just a second, a font, and I'm going to change it to title 2 so it's not quite so big. And what it's telling me here is I'm trying to get the value out and I need to unwrap it. So I'm just going to put the exclamation because at this point I know that I have a value, so it's safe to unwrap it, and I can do that. So now if I run my application and I come over here and I enter my name, if I've done everything correctly, if I register, we get our confirmation. Should have stored it. If I come back over here and I see the welcome Jenny Kunkel on a different view. Now remember, if I am on my register view, when I'm entering the data, it's only in this particular view that I have access to those @state properties. If I go here, I don't see it, but we can see that when I'm switching back and forth, I'm actually persisting that data between the two different forms.